or the way I'm trying to connect the various threads or the various stories that I'm going to tell you today is to really motivate you into thinking that our culture, Indian culture, already provides us with the commodities that we need to succeed, either in the short term or in the long term. So I'm hoping, and there are a lot of scary pictures of me, so I'm sorry about that, but I only had my own racing pictures to put up here. And it's really pretty much trying to chronicle my inroads into sport in a country where traditionally only cricket and tennis are ever paid attention to, or even big federation sport. So let me start off by telling you a bit of a story about my ancestral home, which is in Mannargudi, which is at the Thanjavur district of Tamil Nadu. It's obviously out in rural India, and it's a huge placeholder in my life because I've spent nearly every summer that I can remember at this home. And I have, I'm fortunate to be blessed with two wonderful parents. I have a dad who used to bike about 25 kilometers one way to watch the next big movie. And I think I identify my love for bikes from this man. And he's taught me two very important lessons in life. One is that there is no free lunch. So anything that you do, you really have to work incredibly hard for it. And the second thing he's taught me is that a sense of entitlement really gets you nowhere. So if you're going to sit around and say, things are going to come to me. I have a degree. I have all this. I have that. It's not really going to come to you. I think he's really instilled in us a sense of having to pursue whatever we want to pursue with a passion that is only known to the people to whom the dream seems imaginable. The second wonderful lady in my life is Mom. She's an amazing lady because she also had to face a lot of stereotypes, right? In her day and age, women were not really educated, or there was no premium on education. And I think whatever she's taught me is summed up in this little Tamil quote which says, Kattrathu kaiman alavu, kalladadu ulagalavu, which means that what we know really amounts to a fistful of sand, and it's changing and it's always slipping through your fingers. And what we don't know is really the size of the universe. And if we are able to sort of accept this and be humble about our day-to-day lives, today, even after with all my busy and important degrees and all the stuff that I'm supposed to be doing, if I don't make my bed, or I'm late when I wake up, or I sort of don't contribute towards the lunch table, for example, I'll definitely hear about it from these two. And that's me without a lot of makeup. I actually, I was actually in a beauty parlor for about 5 hours before I stood here today. But that's how I look in real life. I have a PhD. Right. I have a PhD which pretty much stands for permanent head damage. I also have a couple of other lives. I run a small organic company out of Bangalore, and we've sort of extended to a couple of places. And I think my journey as a woman entrepreneur has brought with it a lot of highs and lows. I also teach at a couple of places, and I'm an athlete. That's sort of the driving passion in my life as of now. So let's talk first about stereotypes, or all that we could be. And I think stereotypes applies to everybody. It applies to specific, if you look at the definition of a stereotype, it pretty much means to repeat without variation, right? I mean, there is no difference in what we do from yesterday to today to tomorrow to, generations from now. But clearly in my own sport, I have no such problem. A triathlon is a 3-sport event where you first go and you swim a bit, then you get out and you hop on your bike, and then you get off the bike and then you go on a run. And there are definitely low lunch breaks and definitely no time for coffee and tea, which is why today I had to have copious amounts of caffeine. So people ask me often, what is my inspiration to do something like this? Because obviously sport in India is not given all that much of an emphasis. And I think my inspiration is twofold. One is personal. It comes from a sense of being when I'm alone. I love being alone. I'm a loner at heart. I think solitude is one of the driving forces that actually got me into this arduous sport. And the other inspiration are people like this. I'm sure you don't know the name of the lady on that picture. Her name is Mrs. Leelamma Alfonso. She happens to be one of the premier long-distance marathoners in India. But of course today, if you looked at the TV coverage for the Mumbai Marathon, you'd only see the latest Bollywood hero. And no matter that he's 50 years old and balding, nobody cares, right? Now if you put these two together, I think she would outrun him by about nearly half his time, right? In a marathon, a 42-kilometer race. And today, after having 2 children and multiple reconstructive surgeries, she still runs very, very strong marathons. And she's one of the biggest inspirations that I have. And not as a person, but just in the spirit that she embodies is amazing, right? She's a woman, she has normal responsibilities, and yet she goes out to pursue this. That being said, I must tell you that I don't have any heroes. I don't deify anybody. I don't think putting people up on a platform really helps you. because you have to write your own story first and then read other people's stories. Because if you're busy reading about everybody else, then what are you doing with yourself? That is something that's worth introspecting about. So this journey started back in 2005 at the end of a very long ride with 5 of my best friends. I think maybe it was a sunstroke. I'm not really sure what happened that day. So I called my mom and I said, Mom, I'm going to do an Ironman, right? An Ironman is a 3.8 kilometer swim, followed by 180 kilometers on the bike, and then you run a full marathon at the end of it. So you have to have some serious nutrition on the bike, right? And I think her response was, have you eaten your food? Tell me what else is happening, right? So, I mean, she said that even when I got married. They said, call me back and confirm, right? So, so when I think about women in sports, especially in India, I think we resemble this road wreck right here, right? This is from one of my training rides. And I think no matter how well I try to paint the picture today, we all know at the bottom of our hearts that, we have different challenges as women. We have issues of safety and of camaraderie that we actually have to handle before we go out there and pursue something like long distance running. And a coach, a national level coach, a very powerful man in 2005 told me, why don't you get married instead of swimming? And I think the reason we ever got into a conversation in the first place was because the 50-meter pool in Bangalore was the lane line was being drawn in the middle. So the pool pretty much resembled a Turkish bath. So here you are, paying your fees, getting into that pool, no matter, what kind of skin rashes you're going to get. And these guys draw the lane line widthwise for the women's batch. So I told him, why don't you draw the lane lines like normal people? We'd like to swim. But that's what he said in response. And I'm glad he said it because I think things like this really egg me on once in a while. It still does. I haven't really grown up. So when you talk about training in India, what I've found is I've run into a lot of different people. I've seen a lot of parts of my own country that I could not have seen. And I've seen it without the use of a car. And I also think that the wind runs free over my land too, provided I wear baggy shorts. Because if I wear anything like the Reebok model ads, then I probably am not going to survive, right? So in 2006, I did my first Ironman. This was out of Ottawa in Canada. And, I had no money. I was broke. And I ended up there, that was the only race that I was doing that year. And every year since, for about 2 years, I did only one race a year. And I ended up in a backpackers in Ottawa. I had about $12 to spend a night, and I was living in an 8-bunk backpackers with a Baptist, a runaway nurse, a preacher, a bouncer, and somebody else who had severe mental issues. And I thought, Jesus Christ, what am I going to do? And, clearly we didn't get much sleep, so that really helped my training, And I pretty much raced in my pajamas because, I was not going to go out and buy spandex and all those tight clothes that I can't wear to work. And pretty much, I'd say that the experience was beneficial. In 2007, I repeated the whole one race a year cycle, but then I had realized that I had reached the limits of my performance as far as being in India and training in India went, because for 4 to 5 months of the year, I didn't have access to pools that were heated, and I had severe issues where I wouldn't recover from bouts of bronchitis and stuff like that. So in 2007, at the end of 2007, in fact, I started a PhD. I decided that, what, my brain is a tradable commodity. So for whatever scholarship money I'm getting, I can have access to these pools, and as long as I'm producing my work, my advisor should have no problem. And it paid off because that year I also managed to qualify for the World Championships, and it really was a starting point in my own athletic career. In 2009, I moved into a house with a roommate that had a picture of her SUV in the living room. So at the beginning itself, I had some idea that we were not going to get along. But whatever, it got very annoying to a point where I picked up one day, I got on my bike, I took that little backpack you see in that picture with exactly 1 pair of running shoes, 2 changes of clothes, a bunch of safety pins, my credit card of course, and my favorite book, which is The Call of the Wild by Jack London. And I think that book pretty much embodies something that I've come to know as a very important part of myself. And whatever Buck feels in that story about running off into the wild and doing things, I have felt those same sentiments myself. And this ride was a 3-day ride solo, going from Christchurch to Nelson, which is at the top of the South Island, which is about 440 or 450 kilometers. And I remember a lot of times when things went very badly, and surmounting them was actually the fun part of the whole ride. I didn't want people to come after me. Nobody knew where I was. Maybe 2 people knew that I was out there. I had one person who had my cell phone number so that, in case I was roadkill, they could come and pick me up. But that was it. I really was out there to see what I could achieve. That year, I also had a setback. I raced in China early in the year. I did Ironman China that year, and I raced with a concussion for about 13 hours because I hit my head against, the race boat. And I think pretty much what happened at the beginning of the year summarized, and I had to be pulled out by the medical team. They said they wouldn't let me race. So I think, one of my favorite poets is Kipling, and he says, if you can deal with both triumph and disaster with the same heart rate, I think in athletics speak, I think you'll be better off. Because I mean, if you're too giddy when you have national television on your face, and then you're too down in the dumps when you don't have national television on your face, it's very unlikely that you're going to succeed. So later that year in August, after training with several crazy roommates, and I can write a whole book about that, I towed the line at Ultraman Canada, which happens to be a 3-day endurance race. It's a stage race, and it's the longest triathlon in the world. And pretty much the thought that I had on the second and third day of the race is summed up by this character, the protagonist in the book, Into the Wild, where he says that he knows how important it is not necessarily to be strong, but to feel strong. And I think that the mental aspect of this game is incredibly, incredibly demanding. And I think, having the fortitude to see or live in the moment is probably one of the best gifts we can ever impart to anybody, be it our best friend or our children, if we should have any in the future. The swim on Ultraman Canada is about 10 kilometers long, so you pretty much get disoriented. So my suggestion to you is that you take a lot of chocolate cake. And that's my friend Jason Lester, who has only one arm. You can't see his other arm, but he's an athlete whom, to stand next to was a huge moment for me, because it is something that you only dream of, to be in the company of such athletes. I had no expectations of myself. I did not count my successes or failures. And I pretty much believe that, just being there in that moment was probably the highest point that I could ever get to. The bike on this race is about 420 kilometers long, and the first day you bike about 150 kilometers. And that's me going up the Richter Pass. Actually, most athletes look pretty constipated in most of the race photos. We try very hard to look photogenic, but it seldom happens. And on the second day, we had a 270 kilometer bike ride. And what happened is, it was longer than any bike ride I had ever done in the past. And it was not something that you can train for. You cannot train for a 270 kilometer bike ride. It's just something that you have to go out there and believe your body to be able to do after you've put in maybe years and years of training. And what I really had to do that day was to suspend my disbelief. I think my peers before me have told you what a great emphasis is placed on how failure is such a bad thing in this country, but that's never the problem in my house. My parents will still love me whether I'm first or 10th, and my mom, all that she cares about is have I eaten. So that's pretty much, my luck that I am like that, She doesn't care. And then she loves me with all her heart, but she doesn't care if I'm first. Actually, I think they would be very disappointed if I were first in anything. But, it has happened in the past, and they live with me. So pretty much I suspended disbelief. That year, one of the things that I was not very happy about was, not only did I have that setback in the race in China, which was supposed to be a flagship race, my mom also had a huge back injury, and she was, bedridden for about 6 months. And I think getting to the start of this race was an incredibly difficult thing for me personally, because I just could not focus. In the months leading up to the race, my heart was in 2 places. I knew I had to be in all these places to train, but I couldn't be there fully, because I was always thinking about my mom. But I experienced a whole lightness of being, because really my only hero are my parents, because they have lived by example. And when I thought about her and how she had come through whatever she had faced in the early half of the year, it was pretty easy, I think. I didn't know if I was going to make it. I didn't know if I was going to finish, but I didn't care, and I did finish, so that was a good thing. On the third day, we run what is essentially a double marathon, and it can be pretty daunting, frankly, because the crew somehow, I lost touch with the crew, because I didn't feel that they were really doing their job. And it's very dangerous to go to these endurance races without a good crew, simply because they are the essential elements that hold your hydration and your nutrition together. And if you're not able to make it work with them, it's incredibly hard. So I'm not sure why this is not working, but let's try again. And the double marathon started off. It was a nice day. It was a beautiful day. We had a really good time. I had some difficulties, but then eventually I lost the crew, because I told myself, what, bugger it. I don't want negative energy around me. I find it very difficult to operate around very negative sentiments. So I said goodbye to the crew about 20 miles from finishing, which was a very stupid thing to do, because if I hadn't finished, it would have been too bad. And I did finish. And unfortunately, it's not that I was as high as a kite for having finished this race. It was in fact one of the lowest moments of my life, because I had to take 4 IVs, and I was hospitalized for about 6 hours while I came back to my senses. And pretty much I had nobody. I didn't know anybody. I was in a foreign country, and I didn't know, for better or worse, what was going to unfold after that. But my season continued. 2009 was probably one of the most authentic years I've had as an athlete. And I did a 650-kilometer bike ride in the New Zealand Alps, which I'm sure Vinny can tell you about. They're not all that flat. So the second story I have to tell you today is one about the power of silence when the going gets tough. Now everybody likes to think that athletes in India can live on fruits and fresh air. Let me tell you, the story is a little bit different. And I think that there is plenty of room for failure and pitfalls, because that's just the way life is. I believe life is a bit cyclic, and I think it's for you to see it for what it is. I think that year I had fallen off twice because I was finishing my dissertation, and I couldn't keep my eyes open on two of my bike rides, and I fell down and I injured my shoulder pretty badly. And I had to take a few months off, so I thought to myself, what can I do in this time? I had just graduated with a PhD, so I decided, all right, I'm going to move to Ropar in Punjab and teach in what is essentially a rural setting for an engineering school. And that's the highway between Mohali to Ropar, and let me tell you, it's one of the most beautiful highways. Although it's one of the most dangerous highways in the world, it's also one of the most beautiful highways if you can see the butterflies. Every morning I would wake up with an incredible sense of purpose. I would wake up thinking, man, I can't wait to get to work today. Now the fact that I also met my husband there had nothing to do with this sentiment. And that is that is a view of my window at IIT. It was not as glamorous as it looked. It was housed in a government polytechnic. We had extremely modest facilities, but all the faculty there, at least the ones that I got along with, were under the age of 35, and they really wanted to change the world. They really wanted to be there because that was the love of their life, right? And I also managed to form a group called Indian Women in Science and Engineering. I had a wonderful set of students who did some really great work with community outreach. They went out to the local schools in Ropar, and they interacted with the students to tell them about alternative careers like science and engineering, rather than just picking up commerce or doing something which the kid, depending on the kid's aptitude. And one of my students also built a Facebook app, which then was submitted to the Grace Hopper Conference for Women in Computing. And those two are my dance teachers, who are from Ropar, by the way, and they have incredible personalities as well, and I'm still learning. That year I only raced once, and I had to get on a plane within 90 minutes of finishing the race because I had to get back to work. But when the going got tough, I drew upon the memories that I had. I knew that I was not getting better. My shoulder was not getting better, and I was having an incredibly difficult time finding physiotherapists to help me out. But I drew on the positive images that I had built in my own mind in the past few years in sport. For example, one of the less known facts is that the week after I raced my first Ironman, I also showed up at the Montreal Marathon and ran it at the same split that I had run at Ironman in Ottawa. And at that race, I had followed this evil-looking bunny, because the bunny was really irritating. And it was carrying this placard that said 3. And I thought, damn, this bunny is really irritating, right? I have to get away from it. But unfortunately, the bunny overtook me, and then that was not the end of the humiliation. Another 5 bunnies overtook me after that. And then I realized they are what are called pace bunnies. So these are all bunnies that are leading people to a 3-hour marathon or 3:30 marathon. And if I had tried to stay with that particular bunny, I might have died of a heart attack. So good for me, right? And I also drew on the memory of Ironman Canada, which I had participated in within 3 weeks of finishing Ultraman Canada. And when I was doing Ultraman, nobody in Canada or in Penticton knew my name. They didn't know who I was. They just knew there was some random Indian chick trying to do this with a nose ring, right? And they thought it was pretty wild. But when I got to Ironman Canada, it was a totally different story. Everybody knew my name, and the whole town came together and applauded, and that was a really great high for me. And I drew on all these. I said, okay, you have those memories too, so don't choose to always sit and wallow in what's not working in your life right now. And I also came out with 2 acceptable titles, one of Doctor and the other of Mrs. So I found a crazy guy to marry me, as the story goes. And I think my peers will attest to that. So 2011, if you think the going is already bad, I think what you can't see is really what is the daunting thing. And I think in 2011 things got worse. My husband and I went to New Zealand on what was supposed to be a honeymoon/training camp, and we went through the 6.2 magnitude earthquake on February 22nd. Following this, we had an incredible amount of anxiety. Our health went to hell, and we could not keep up with our lives, because he was starting an MBA. I had moved, cities. Ahmedabad is incredibly hot. Things were just going nuts, right? But in any case, I'm very fortunate and very privileged to have found someone like that for a partner, because he still encouraged me to continue and to finish and to persist and to really protect my dream, as some of my peers have told you before, because it is yours. It's like a lamp, in a blowing gale that you have to protect, and it's up to you really. Nobody's going to do that for you. And the sort of next story that I have to tell you is about Smriti, or that which is remembered. And one of the stories that I wish to tell you about is my student at IIT Ropar, whose name is Kapil Mittal. And this kid, when I started, I can't find his slide, but I'll tell you his story anyway. He is somebody who had a problem with English, right? I mean, there were a lot of kids in IIT Ropar who could not speak English, and they had to go through this English, transitioning thing before they started college or whatever. However, this kid was in my computer architecture class, and I could see that he was working hard. Every day I could see that he would show up to class, he would do his work, he would do his homework, everything was fine, but he was not performing well on his tests. So I called him to my office, I said, what's happening? And he says in his own wonderful way, he says, sab sahi hai madam, sab sahi hai. I said, acha, sab sahi hai to aise grades अच्छे क्यों नहीं आ रहे? नहीं madam, आप चिंता मत करो, सब सही है. सब ठीक हो जाएगा. And I thought, अगर सब ठीक हो जाएगा, then you're going to end up with a D, right? I don't want a D for you. So what I thought was that perhaps this is a different student who does not learn by just rote or exams or giving out complexity algorithms on papers. So I had my class present one section of computer architecture, pretty much on mathematical puzzles, to me and the rest of the class. And the TA was also present in this section of the presentation. And believe it or not, Kapil Mittal, who could not speak a line of English, right, who had so much difficulty with the language, scored top points, right? And I was not the only one judging him. There were people in the class who were attesting to whether or not they had understood what he was saying. There was an incredibly smart TA who was also grading him, and then there was me. So I was only a very small part of the equation. So what I have found really is that in our particular setup, I do believe that there are different ways and modes of learning, and my students have been very receptive to that, and whoever I've worked with has been very receptive to my trying these things. So when we talk about commodifying culture, for example, a commodity is defined as something that is useful or valued, and culture is defined as perhaps a set of values, conventions, or social practices associated with a particular characteristic or a group. And what I'm trying to tell you today is that I believe, or I'm trying to pose this question, what is Indian culture when it comes to unconventional ideas or unconventional dreams? And I have the good, the bad, and the ugly associated with what I have found that Indian culture has to offer. And I can only speak from my vantage point. I think I've had some early success teaching at big schools where people do receive your ideas with some aplomb. They don't totally beat you down. I've had incredible people that have also supported my dream in sport. It took 5.5 years, but that's all right because there was a rainbow at the end of it. And I'm an optimist. I believe in rainbows. And I think running a small business as a woman has also taught me a lot that it is possible. Anything you set your mind to is possible, and it is possible here. And the other thing that I try to impart to my students is probably around the ideas of existentialism. So let's just look at things for what they are. We often talk about people like Infosys or Microsoft, and then there is a huge star in people's eyes, right? Oh, I'm working for this person and that person. But what I say is that try to think about history for what it was. There was a guy called Kublai Khan, who was the grandson of somebody called Genghis Khan, whom we think is a Hun, or he is somebody who is a barbarian. What does he know? But in reality, if you were to read history closely, Kublai Khan managed an empire that was much greater than Alexander the Great, right? And he had people, he had ideas like passports, currency, citizenship. So he had people managing these things for him, and those were very innovative practices of the time. And he was also extremely secular. So instead of lauding people like Rajat Gupta, who now is not so great, or even other big people that we tend to hero worship, what I'm trying to really say is that let's look at things for what they are. Right? Nation states today are nothing compared to the kingdoms of yesterday. And I also try to tell my students that try to focus on understanding what shining India is versus living in India means, right? It's not that all our dreams have come true here. We have had to travel incredible distances to make some of these things come true. Not that we are worse off for wear, but also try to understand that assimilating the good parts of a culture is probably what will make you succeed. American culture is not so much about McDonald's and jeans. It's also about riding to work on your bicycle, and also perhaps putting yourself through college. I've had some peers who put themselves through college, who paid for their own college, for example. So let's try to delineate things for what they are. Let's try to accept that there are certain portions of life where we are protected, and then there are certain portions of life where we are already ahead of the curve. And let's see the game for what it is. I've met some wonderful people at Hyderabad and then at IMA. I have the greatest respect for my peers. Now the bad things are, of course, grassroots activism. So I was just telling a couple of the students here about IWISE, Indian Women in Science and Engineering. We need more programs like this. We need to obviously assimilate where we are. It's not about spending 4 years in NITTE not knowing how things are outside the gates of campus, right? You have to go out and actually see how people live their lives. Otherwise, what are you really learning? And the other thing is, do we really know what we are eating? Because I think as an athlete, I spend incredible amounts of time thinking about what I eat. And for me, to be as thin as a pencil is actually a compliment. And I know a lot of us have body image issues, right? Am I too thin? Am I too fat? Am I too chubby? Or am I too pink? I'm not sure what the parameters are. So while I was in Roper, I found this interesting fact that the fruits and vegetables that I was buying were not all that great. And I was a little surprised because Punjab happens to be an incredibly agriculturally oriented state. And what I found was that the produce that was grown in Punjab on National Highway 7 first went to Chandigarh and New Delhi before it came to Roper or Kharad or wherever it is that we lived. And so what I'm trying to tell you, to steal from my friend Larry Lessig, is that over 6 years, if you look at the cost of food, you will see that vegetables now cost 17% more to produce. Okay? As opposed to the Big Mac burger, which costs about 5.5% less. So that should be telling you something about the price of food. And a can of Coke, which today costs 35% less after 6 years. So what is that telling you? I think pretty much eating anything you find just for the brand value is not really the way to live your life. I think, and food is very central to who we are and how we function. No matter how many riches and castles you build tomorrow, unless you're healthy, it's very unlikely that you're going to actually make any progress. And the ugly part to whatever Indian culture has to offer when it comes to thinking about unconventional ideas is that, unfortunately, I feel, and I'm allowed to say this today after having taught for a while, is that we somehow seem to deify people, that we are somehow okay with being spectators in this big sport, right? I mean, it's okay to just watch TV for hours and hours, cricket on TV on a big screen for hours and hours. And really the question that we need to ask ourselves is, are the papers really telling us everything? Are they really telling us exactly what is happening out there? And the other real big question is, are we really able to participate in this life rather than just spectate, right? Because the world is full of armchair critics. I don't think we need to be the next generation of them. And if you asked me today what my sentiments are, I think it's articulated very well in this line by Tarun Tejpal, where Rajbir Gujjar is this sports coach who is coaching people, and he faces the universal affliction of all athletes, struggling to level with infinitely more complex rules of life outside the playing arena. And what that really means is that I know life is not a sport. I know that being an athlete, it's easy for me, right? How much ever you put in, that much is what you're going to get out. Now in life, things are a little bit more complicated, and I completely acknowledge that. But if you asked me, in conclusion, I think we need to keep the good, sort of work on the bad parts, and combat the ugly with as much ado as we can. And that our culture really provides us with the commodities if we need, and if we choose to see it for what it is, and acknowledge the good and the bad about it. Thank you.